Good evening. I want to welcome our viewers to the Johnson City Government Information Channel on Charter Cable Channel 192 and Comcast Cable Channel 17 to this live telecast of the May 8th, 2018 Johnson City Regional Planning Commission meeting. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Friday, May 11th, 2018 at 12 p.m. So welcome. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. If you don't mind calling the roll for us.
Commissioner Lowe.
Present.
Commissioner Harrell.
Here.
Commissioner Sandos.
Here.
Commissioner Clark. Here. Commissioner Pavlich.
Here.
Commissioner Wild.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Chairman Zions.
Here. And our first, let's go ahead and start with our invocation in our Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Sandos. And I want to briefly extend our congratulations and thanks to her for her serving on the commission. As I just learned, this may be her last, or is her last meeting with us. So thank you.
If we can bow our heads. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the ability to be gathered here today, for the rights that we can exercise here in this room. We ask that you use your protecting hands to guide each person that is here in this room as they travel home safely this evening. Also help guide our decisions and the things that we will be reviewing today, the words that we speak. Let them be reflections of the knowledge that you've bestowed upon us. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
You can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So our first order of business will be approval of tonight's agenda. We had an item removed from the agenda, item number 2, the rezoning of the property located on Oakland Avenue. So I'd make that addition that we remove that from the agenda. Does anybody have a motion for approval of the agenda or a second?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So at this point, next will be approval of the minutes from our meeting of April 10, 2018.
Move to approve.
A motion to approve?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Our unfinished business will be next. Involved in unfinished business, the first point of business is dedication of the Poinciana Place as a public street. So if staff can help us out there, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is a request to dedicate Poinciana Place as a public street. The Planning Commission initially considered this petition at its meeting in March 2018. At the time, it was the general mind of the Planning Commission that the applicants should bring up this driveway to public street standard before it will be accepted. At the same time, the Planning Commission gave the opportunity for the applicants to appear before you and make a case if they wanted the commission to rule otherwise. This is the reason this application is back before you today. In 2015, when this request was first submitted, brought before the city, the engineering department went out and made an assessment or an evaluation of the right-of-way and pointed out a couple of issues that would need to be taken care of in order to bring Poinciana Place up to public street standards. One of it was that Poinciana Place has no curb, no gutter. It has no sidewalks, which are required in every local street per the subdivision regulations of the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission. As mentioned, all residential streets, whether they are lanes or they're local streets, they're supposed to have curb, they're supposed to have sidewalks. Lanes only require a 40 feet right of way, while local streets require a 50 feet right of way. What is proposed is a 40 feet right of way for a lane. 50 feet will be too wide, will have a lot of effect on the driveway, and would significantly be too close to the buildings, to the existing buildings, Unit 63 to Unit 65. So this is proposed to be dedicated as a lane. The T section of that lane, Public Works Department in its evaluation determined that it meets and exceeds the minimum requirement for for a lane in the subdivision regulations, just the T section. Another issue that the Public Works Department pointed out is that Ponciana Place was constructed as a driveway. It doesn't have the curb radar that normally you will have for a street. If you're going into a street, say from about this point, you will have a curb that goes in. The same thing in this direction, it will curve, you have greater curb. But this was just kind of constructed straight onto the street as a driveway, because that is the way it was proposed by the developer, to simply be a driveway. It wasn't proposed as a public street. For this reason, it did not have those corner radar. If it were to be accepted as a public street and to be brought up to public street standard, this is one other item that would need to be taken care of. A couple of other items were also identified, one of them being that the pavement schedule of Ponciana Place itself, as constructed, meets the schedule of an alley. So the thickness of the pavement, to say as constructed, it meets public street standards for local street, for a lane and for an alley. There are a couple of areas which maybe following mowing or car use, depreciation, are significantly bad, and these areas will need to be patched up. If you were to put curb and gutter, this will be taken care of by the curb, and gutter. The homeowner association is presented the option of these being dedicated to the city as a public alley instead of a lane. As an alley, Ponciana Place will meet the definition of an alley per the subdivision regulations. An alley is defined as a street set aside primarily for vehicular access to the side or rear of the properties, otherwise abutting a street. Units 63 to 65 abut Willow Springs Drive, which is a public street. Unit 59 to 62, they abut Greenwood Drive, which is a public street. So based on this, Ponciana Place will meet the definition of an alley, because it would be in the rear of the lots or the units that abut Willow Springs Drive, and it will be in the rear of the units that abut Greenwood Drive. So basically, it would meet that definition. In terms of design standards, it also meet the minimum required width. It meet the pavement schedule. It has a pavement width on Ponciana Place is averagely 20 feet. The minimum pavement width required in an alley is 11 feet. So it would meet and exceed that requirement. Significantly, however, Section 3-2.4.6, tool of the subdivision regulations of the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission, require that an alley cannot be named. This is named Ponciana Place. It has a sign on it, Ponciana Place. I think the sign was put up by the property owners, was privately put up, wasn't erected by the city. Because of an incident that happened in this particular area, one of these units, and 911 emergency services had a difficulty getting to the unit because there was no sign directing them to the house. So if the Planning Commission were to name this as an alley, to accept dedication of this as an alley, strictly speaking, the sign will have to be taken away. The city maps, 911 maps that contain Ponciana Place, so named, that name will have to be taken away. The addresses will have to be removed. All the houses that are currently addressed as Ponciana Place will have to be removed. They will most likely then be addressed of Trillium Trail, because there is significant slope of Willow Springs Drive and Greenwood Drive. 911 does not favor that this name be removed because of this safety problem of the past. they think it will constitute a significant liability. It's therefore before the Planning Commission to decide, in fairness, whether this needs to be brought up to public street standards, considering all other subdivision and what other developers in the city do, or to make any exception for this to be accepted as an alley, a named alley. Yes, sir.
Just because there's so many exceptions to the policy, why is this not at the BZA first?
This does not have to go, in terms of the setback requirements,
In terms of making an alley a road and making all the exceptions, how many exceptions did you ask us to?
if there are six improvements.
Six improvements and one exception?
That there are six improvements that will have to be made to bring this up to public street standard.
For a lane,
Those,
to keep it addressed.
to keep it,
Have
yes,
To keep
function
an address, which is
as
the
a lane.
exception of an alley, right?
as an alley. Those do not go to the Board of Zoning Appeals because this is a subdivision issue. It falls 100% within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. The Board of Zoning Appeals only deals with variances and special exceptions that arise from the zoning ordinance.
Fair enough.
This has nothing to do with the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
If, it should be mentioned, if these were dedicated as a public street and Pontiana Place were the front yard, variances, however, will at that time be required because some of those lots will not meet the front yard setback requirement. Namely, unit 65, 64, no, 64 will meet, 65 will not, 63, 62, 60, 59, they will not meet.
So we're changing the whole characteristic of the neighborhood, correct?
Sorry, sir.
Would you say we're changing the whole characteristic of the neighborhood?
There will be a significant change. if-
Are
if
they
this were-
asking for alley or specifically a street? In my agenda, it says, they wanted a public street.
That's what I saw.
Not alley, right? The
Um,
request isn't for alley, correct?
As requested, it was for a street, but they have said, okay, if we can make this a lane, public street, can it be taken as an alley? They've made that
But 911
option.
won't allow that.
But
But
it-
911
it's
will not
just a
allow that
semantics
because-
things. Alleys function differently from streets.
From streets, yes.
And they function differently in our address system and 911 system and everything else.
Yes, sir.
So it's not just an idea of semantics, and this is not functioning as an alley, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, anything else? What were your recommendations and follow-up and recommendations to the commission?
The staff's recommendation.
A couple of options present.
Recommendation.
The standard recommendation.
Staff is recommending that the granting of an exception to the regulatory prohibition of the naming of alleys in order to permit the dedication of Pontiana Place as a public alley street will raise concerns of preferential considerations to the applicant that can only be avoided by extending the same exception to other private streets that meet the definition of an alley and will be brought before the Planning Commission in future. And there are some already lined up. It should be mentioned. In order to maintain fair and proper development standards across the city, it will be appropriate that the applicants make the necessary improvements to bring Pontiana Place to the design standards of a lane and then present the offer of street dedication to the Planning Commission for approval. This is staff's recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very much. We'll do some question of staff in a moment, if that's okay. Let's go ahead and have folks come on up. Let's open up the public hearing. And I'd like to entertain now anybody wishing to speak for or against the dedication of Ponciana's Place as a public street. So this is our public forum. Please step forward. We're glad to hear you. And when you do approach the podium, give us your name and address, please, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Joel Kavanaugh with a K. My address is 573 Trillium Trail, Johnson City 37604. Thank you all for taking time to let us come tonight. apologize for the March meeting. We had no inkling we were on the itinerary. And I found out we weren't on April because I had questioned Mr. Bernard if we were, and he said no. Fortunately, you've got us now. And there's some things from the inception of this Poinciana issue. Now, I'm a new resident of the area, and it's totally foreign what I'm running into here. Several years ago, Carol Spagnola, I think probably some of you have heard that name, started trying to get information on Poinciana Lane and trying to get it turned over to the city. Now, Lane is the first time I've heard tonight. Alley is the thing that we wanted it designated as. And I had a bunch of things together, but I'm sure you've already got it all from Mr. Bernard. The confusion that we had with the original residents of Poinciana, there was no mail delivery. That gets back to, I guess, the 911 calls, why 911 evidently is against making the change. Now, but he also said making an address for Trillium Trail on that. Am I understanding that right?
Could you say that one more time, please?
On Poinciana, change it to Trillium Trail so that the addresses on Poinciana could now be on Trillium Trail, which would take care of the 911 issue. Is that?
Are you understanding that naming that Trillium Trail? Because I believe my understanding is that there would be no name on it if it is an alley. The current homeowners who are using the Poinciana Place address would have to change their address. And what Hassan has suggested is that they could change it to a Trillium Trail address, or they could change it to a Greenwood Drive address, or to the other street, Willow Springs
Springs.
address.
And I
But
think
it
we want
wouldn't be
to,
named.
and that's one of the things I think we can deliberate rather than,
Okay.
and maybe not end up in a discussion over the what
Right,
we're dealing
okay.
with. But I'd like to hear your view, if you don't mind giving us sort of a 5-minute overview of what you think we need to hear to deliberate well on this. And what we're specifically, so that we keep this thing on the rails of what we're talking about tonight. And what we've been asked to adjudicate or understand today is, are we going to dedicate this as a public street? And that's what came to us. And so please.
But our
help
request has
us
been
understand.
for an alley, and the HOA is requesting this because it was a recommendation made by Phil Penzola to a group of HOA homeowners. Now, this goes back before I was involved in it, and this was several years ago. The street designation said that it had to require the city to make major improvements on the road. And you probably have the copy of the letter from Alan Cantrell to Steve Nielsen dated October 27th, 2015. Have you got that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, confusion seems to be the state of this whole thing, because to indicate a road based on what paperwork we've got, it didn't meet city standards when it was built. And yet, when the engineering went out with Alan's letter, or Alan's note, it said it didn't meet it. But later on, it did meet the qualifications. So that's what we're confused about. And with the regulations, we go to 1, 2, 3 of the letter. But then we come back that the entire road was never built to city code. That's where part of our confusion comes in. Building permits, if issued, wouldn't have been questioned. We don't know about that.
Well, I mean,
So-
not to enter into discussion, but clearly from our understanding of this is actually built as a private drive, and that's why it comes off the road with a driveway curb cut. It doesn't come off as a road or an alley. It was built as a private drive. And so that's why you're running into these issues. It's how the property was developed, and that's the concern. And now we have a private driveway that has residences on it that are being used as an address, and that's the issue. And so it's not necessarily confusion. It was how the developer built it.
Well, some of the buildings had to be, anyone have any, we've got several folks here from the,
Please, if you could just come up, please. Thank you, I'm sorry.
If you would.
Thank you very much.
Carol Spagnolo, I've been working on this for quite some time now.
Okay.
The houses on Poinciana Place are not facing Willow Springs Drive, and they're not facing Greenwood Drive. They are facing Poinciana. That's why those people have a Poinciana address.
Right.
There is a city street light on Poinciana that the city put in. When we moved into this neighborhood, we all naturally assumed this was a road. Because there was a sign, because there was a street sign, and then the houses were built facing Poinciana. We had no idea that we were going to take on the maintenance of this pavement, is what it is. So I don't understand how permits were given to build those houses facing Poinciana Place, facing a private driveway. They're not facing main roads, they're facing a private
Well,
driveway.
I don't think that's necessarily what we need to discuss tonight is permits and why they were issued, so, but
This
we're
is why
glad
we're
to-
trying to get it designated
Right.
to the city,
Well, it's an
because
unfortunate situation.
because
I
of the
don't
way
think
it turned
that
out.
Anybody, I'm not saying people don't understand and have empathy with what you're dealing with.
Okay.
But I think there's explanations to those types of questions, but what we're trying to decide is how to answer your question of dedicating this as a public street and how you can solve that and how we can help you solve that.
Okay.
So, and that's what we're here to do tonight. I'd like to finish your comments, please, sir, if we have.
Let's remember, we are a small homeowner association. To get that made into the qualification for a city street would just be astronomical. The builder, the developer are the ones that got the approvals to put the building lots in. So is Poinciana considered access to a public road is a question. We don't have an answer to that. The road does meet the requirements. In January, we were advised, Carol was advised, that if we get a survey done, and Glenn Shellhut did it, that it was just a done deal because the survey had to be in place, all the issues had to be shown what was where, the HOA paid for that. And then we hear again, it's not reasonable. Help us to understand what needs to be done to make this an alley or a lane without humongous expenses. We're dealing with an adversarial builder.
Right.
You saw the pictures, the road's being torn up. We have nothing to say about that.
I'm curious, when we met last time and had deferred this, the last time that this body actually understood this and heard this, instead of actually deciding on it at that meeting, to try to be friendly and helpful and do exactly what you just said, is to help you as we directed our staff to reach out to you on your options and what to do. Did anybody have those conversations with you then?
The only options that we heard was to make it a road, was to do curbs, sidewalks, and redo it.
So they did
That's
contact.
all we heard.
Okay.
And that was to make it a city street. Our desire is not to make it a city street and alleyway. So help us somehow to get this issue resolved. I mean,
Thank you.
totally, there's 110 homes.
Sure do
in the
appreciate
area.
it.
So please help us. Give us some guidance of what we can do reasonably, financially, and we would sure appreciate it.
Can we get a song back up? Would you explain again why the alleyway is not going to work for these folks because of addresses and 911 and all that stuff?
The subdivision regulations does not permit the naming of an alley. And 911 does not permit the naming of an alley. If you say it's an alley, then it's just some path in the rear yard of buildings. The buildings or the houses should have their addresses of a public street. There should be a public street. If you call it an alley, then you should not name it.
So alley is not going to meet their,
So once you take, if you say this is an alley, then you have to take away the name. It ceases to be called Poinciana Place. Three things will have to happen. One, we'll have to remove the sign that names it Poinciana Place. We'll have to take away that name from our maps, city maps, 911 maps. And then thirdly, they'll have to change their addresses because Poinciana Place, that name no longer exists. That's the third thing. Now, based on the experience of that 911 had in the past from the incident that happened, in one which I think he knows the details of that particular incident in one of these units, one of the 3 units that was built there at the time, 911 could not find a house.
Did not find poison. couldn't find the
the
Poinciana
location of
Place.
the incidents.
But
So,
on Poinciana Place, is that?
Correct.
yes, because
Because it
they did
wasn't
not
a
have,
road.
it could not find it, because they didn't have a name, they didn't have a sign.
Because it was just a made-up name.
It
Ma-
did have a sign.
I'm saying it,
But they couldn't
It's a
find it.
private
it was
drive.
a private
It's
drive
a
as a
private
sign.
drive, it's not
Does that make
functioning, and
sense?
that's.
Yes.
there in-
That's why it wasn't on the 911
It
map.
just, yes.
So if we entertained your request now to make it an alley, that's not going, doesn't appear that that's going
Your
to meet
address would
your
have to
needs.
change to the
You know,
road,
Everything's going to come.
to the outside.
And then my next question to Asong is, do you have any, or is Alan here, do you have any idea what the expense would be to bring it up to the standards of a lane
I think,
as opposed to a city street?
I will let Alan speak to the details, but also to mention that at a meeting in March, the Planning Commission was open to certain deviations, which the commission has powers to make, in terms of the standard, the design standard for a lane has sidewalk on both sides. The Planning Commission was open to sidewalk just on one side.
Right.
Because if you look, these units are not, they don't access Poinciana Place, you know. The driveway is straight on Trillium Trail. So you could have sidewalk just on this side. Secondly, there was a deviation that sidewalk would not be required on this T end of Poinciana Place. So those are some of the concessions that the Planning Commission was
Right.
open to making.
I've got a question. Since there have been obviously, I hesitate to say several mistakes made, but a lot of misunderstandings made. And I understand what you said about an alley and all that, but why couldn't we do something simple and apply a little common sense maybe, and maybe call it Poinciana Place, and in parentheses beside it, put alley? You know? It seems to me like we're kind of punishing folks for something that they really didn't have a lot to do with. I don't know. I wasn't there.
But that affects
would-
their addresses, if they are approaching, or their ingress and egresses off of an alley, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, no, I mean, let's be fair. Actually,
Hey, wait a
when this
minute.
body met before, what we had actually discussed and, or where we recommended, and the reason we did not decide on this issue before is, number one, we didn't want to punish. Number two, we did want this to function. Semantics, calling it an alley, but it not being an alley, that's completely different. If it's an alley, and you treat it like an alley, and you clean it like an alley, and you do everything you're going to do with it like an alley. If it's a street, you treat it like a street. We realized, because of the issues, that this would have to be, it would be more beneficial to you to function for your addresses, 911, and everything that's happening, to have it function as a street, which is why we asked for it as a street or a lane, right? And it wouldn't be too hard to make this as a lane. It needs a sidewalk. There were some right-of-way issues that go before the BZA would make it fine. So it wasn't an insurmountable or a ridiculous amount of upgrades. It was simply what it was going to be. These homes were built on a private driveway.
That's why
And
I
to
wanna
just
hear
make it
from
function
Alan.
like a street, you make it a street, you just can't apply a semantic name to it and say, well, now we're just, going to call it this, because it does begin to violate some principles of what we do as a city and our standards. But we didn't want to make it where you have to have two sidewalks up and down the whole side. That doesn't make sense. That's unreasonable, of course. And there are exceptions. There's exceptions on right-of-way setbacks. We were completely reasonable in understanding that it doesn't have to be quite so wide. It's only serving a small number of people, as long as you have safe turnaround for emergency vehicles and fire trucks. We're good. So it's not that this body is asking anybody to be unreasonable. The homes were built on a private driveway. And so if we're going to name it an alley, it's going to have to function like a private driveway with no name, and your addresses need to be
That's not what
someplace
you-
else. Or if it's going to function like a driveway and it's going to be the city assume the street, then it has to meet some modicum of what city standards are. And that's what this body came back with. So it wasn't really that we're trying to punish anyone. This just is kind of what it is, and we tried to make those concessions, and we directed staff to very carefully communicate those types of concessions back, because we didn't want to just say no out of hand. The body wanted to say yes. And it's also important that we don't just say yes to every exception that comes along as a body, because developers love to do things like this. Let's build a driveway and throw a few things on it, potentially, and we're going to build some things here, and then people buy the homes later, and then they go, I didn't know I moved into this home like this.
And it is what it is at this
It
point.
is.
So we got to
And-
try to fix it. Let's hear
Well,
from,
and that's when you've got to try to fix it. These are your
Yes.
homes where you are, and this is your street, and it's a private street.
and Alan
and-
Cantrell can give us a good idea of what it would take to make it a lane.
And the
Okay.
history.
So I think that's
Well, don't know.
again, it's a private drive. But let's not have a discussion from the bench. I really try to get away from that. I really want to make sure I listen to everyone here who wants to speak. And I'd like to hear staff. Let's go ahead and hear Alan, but then let's finish up our public hearing.
I'm only here to answer her question about cost. If you have other questions, I'll be glad to come back up. But we didn't prepare an estimate, so if I give you a number now, it's going to be kind of an educated guess. And the more than likely, when they go see contractors, they're going to find it's more than what I think it would be. I'm not real sure exactly how long the street is, but it's going to be in the neighborhood of $100,000 plus or minus a few more $1,000, because you're talking about 2 sidewalks unless you give them a deviation to 1.
We did.
And you're talking about curb and gutter, and because it is a permanent turnaround, it's a T-type instead of a round one, the curbing has to go around that too.
On a lane.
Yes. Permanent cul-de-sacs always have curbing around them, but no sidewalk. The sidewalk doesn't have to go around the T. It just comes down to it. So those were the 2 major things, and then you've got to go up to the corner and remove the driveway appearance and build the radiuses, which may end up going on to other common property they own, but I don't think that's an issue with them. But it gets the street a little closer on the corner to those 2 homes that are on the corners. So I'm going to tell you a rough estimate without knowing a lot of stuff is in the $100,000 range.
And if you were to redevelop it as a street, what's on top of that? What's more expensive to make it a street?
My figure is to convert it to a street.
Oh, that's your street figure?
Yeah.
Okay. If they were to look at a lane, which seems to maybe sound.
Well, a lane is a street. A lane is
I
our
thought it had
smallest,
lesser-
How many square feet? How wide is a lane?
40?
this street is about a foot too narrow to fit the lane designation.
Okay.
But it can be converted easily as you put in the sidewalk. I mean, put in the curbing to add that. But the lane is a narrower right-of-way. It fits in a 40-foot right-of-way instead of a 50. And it serves up to 240 cars a day, which this would easily be under. It's designed mainly to have about 30 units on it, up to about 30 units on a lane. And then you step up to a little bit wider street and wider right-of-way. So the developer, had he built a public street, would have built a lane here.
Okay.
I have a question. Do you care just to share some of the history about the homes and the thought processes?
Well,
Is that out of your scope?
no,
Or is that under your scope?
I was around. You can see the shiny head. In the early,
Can you go to that, Hassan, if you could, where the slide with the 4 homes and the 3 homes? There, oh, back one.
Plat.
Yeah, the plat, thank you. Couldn't find that word.
occasionally we get accused of being too hard on developers and we don't do enough to help developers with their projects. That comes up in cycles, and I've seen that in the years I've been here, which is 32, come and go. And we just come out of the 2001 era recession, the smaller one that, the big one happened a few years later. Things were starting, people were starting to get loans again to start up, and through 2004, 5, and 6, we saw a resurgence of subdivision development, which had basically stopped around 2001. With that renewed interest in building streets and subdivisions, we were taking a kinder look at what was being presented to us to help developers start these projects back up. This developer was presenting kind of a planned unit type development, even though the zoning may not be exactly that, where he would put smaller lots, group things together. And about 5 or 6 years before that, we had actually been receiving training that that was the way things were going to be, more compact, closer, higher density type things. We've had instances where terrain has prevented lots that might front a street from being they're so steep they can't get a driveway from that street up to a garage. So we've allowed private drives to serve a few numbers of units, 3, 4 units, along some portion of the property. So those are usually on easements, crossing other people's private property. They're not public right-of-ways. The one that comes to mind before this was developed is on the top of the ridge at the backside of Tunbridge subdivision. The only difference is those homes do face the street that they're addressed on, and the driveway comes in the back, kind of like an alley, and serves the back sides of the homes. I could probably think hard and come up with 2 or 3 more instances where we've allowed private driveways serve more than 2 or 3 units. We had a regulation that's no longer in the subdivision regs that was really caused because of a ruling about condominiums. Condominiums would build a lot of units and build an aisle through a parking lot. And then when the time came to pave those parking lots and those aisles, they would show up here and say, we can't afford to pave our condominium complex. We'd like you to take it over as a city street. Well, it's worn out then, and the public, the rest of the citizens, had to go in and then spend money on that street. So to prevent that from happening, we had a regulation that said that if you have, it's trying to be understandable, if you're a really large condominium or multi-building project, you will not be able to build a private drive if you're over 4 buildings in size or over 30 units in size. That will have to be built as a public street, so we don't have to face taking it over later. Smaller projects, we were given a little bit of credit to allow them to happen without having to build large public streets. And they could build on private drives if they were 4 buildings or less or no more than 30 units. The problem, and that's how this one was reviewed, under that ruling, 4 buildings or less, the 3 units that faced the entrance street were conceivably, it was possible that they would not face that way. If they, towards Poinsettia, I'm trying to avoid saying that word because I can't pronounce it well. It was conceivable that they could be built with a basement and have their main floors more level with the upper street, and they would face out. So staff, understanding that, said, okay, that puts 4 buildings here, it can be a private drive. The developer proposed it as a private drive. Our regulations at the time allowed that to happen. The board, made up of different people than you, approved that plat, and it got built that way.
As a private drive.
As a private drive.
That's how it functions.
Thank you, sir.
Well, now there's some more confusion. 3 to 4. We see 7. Another issue.
They're facing the wrong direction.
Yeah, they're
And?
facing the wrong
They're
direction.
facing the wrong
They're
direction.
all facing the wrong direction.
3 of them are.
Help. You know, some common sense would certainly go a long way.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak for or against? We're glad to hear from you, please.
In our development, those houses are built in a hole, okay? The backyards are just dirt, a dirt
I
hill.
understand.
In our development, right now, there are 6 houses under construction, and there are others that are already completed. who- Okay, who do have, they are level with the street, okay? And they do have basements. Those houses were supposed to face the main roads, okay? Which is what we understood when we first moved in there and first bought there. Those houses were supposed to face the other way. I'm assuming the builder, because it was cheaper for him to make it in a hole with no basement, okay? But he could have done it the way the other houses are built in the community right now. He just chose, and why he got approved, I don't know. but he chose to do it this way in the hole. We actually have a problem paying a landscaper because they can't landscape that hill. They can't weed whack it because you can't even climb up the hill. So those houses were supposed to face the other way, and all the utilities are on the main roads, not on Poinciana. They're on the main roads the way those houses were supposed to face. Okay? And it could have been done the right way. The builder chose it. And he's not a developer. He'll tell you he's not a developer. He's just a builder. He owns just the lots. He bought that in foreclosure. Okay? But it could have been done the right way. And we wouldn't be where we are right now, because that would have been just a driveway, instead of us having to do this now. So we got stuck. We got stuck because this whole thing got turned around. Okay.
Any
So we
further
need your
comments?
counsel on.
We would certainly be glad to have staff continue to work with you. That's not a problem at all. We just needed to continue to deliberate on this. Who would like to speak next?
For making this an alley.
Can you give me
Bruce
your
Earl.
name and address, please, sir?
My name's Bruce Earl. I live on 1346 Willow Springs Drive. There's issues that haven't been discussed. The spectrum's been kind of closed, and I think you should be enlightened to more what's going on. Okay. First of all, the developer didn't build it right. That's obvious. I think we can all agree with that. But we're going to be taking the burden of paying for this. And this is where it's going to happen. The HOA cannot afford it. HOA, we vote on everything. We only need 50% of the people to dissolve the HOA. Then the people that buy those properties are stuck with that driveway. That's an issue that you guys have to consider. The other issue is, the only fault with that being an alley is the 911. The mailboxes are located in a different area. There's no other reason why that has to have a name.
Understanding the address would have to leave. If it functions as an alley
Right.
and labels an alley, you'd
Right,
lose
and
the
they could go
Poinciana
to
Place
Trillium
address.
for their mailing address, because
Right,
that's where
okay.
the mailboxes are anyway. So that wouldn't be that big of an issue, because there'd only basically be 3 people that would have to change their address. The other 4 people don't even live there yet. The houses aren't even finished. So 911 could either just have, some places they just have a number. They go by a number. Or they can make that extension of Trillium Lane. They don't have to have the sign there, but it runs into it anyway. It's a short street. They're going to be able to figure it out. And like I said, with this situation, if we end up getting stuck with it, our HOA fees are at a point where some people are already complaining about them. They're reasonable, but if they go up drastically, which they have to do, I can assure you that people I've talked to will dissolve the HOA. Then they're going to have those problems there, and it'll go back on the city. Those people all pay city taxes. They're on another thing that has been mentioned, that was expanded for the city. That used to be the county, and it's right on the border. Those people might say, you don't want to take care of us, put us back in the county then. It's going to create a lot of issues if we don't take care of this. It'll be a lot easier if we take care of this, either make it an alley, make some exceptions. We can make 911 work, or the city or the developer or the builder takes on the burden of repairing that road to meet street standards. The builder will have to indicate when he sells those 4 properties that that's a private road. Those people have to take care of those once we dissolve the HOA, and they're going to be stuck with a lot of costs. And they're going to have conflicts of right-of-way, possibly, I don't know the law in this state, about the people sharing that and taking care of that. I've known where I lived before, there was major difficulties on private roads where multiple families were using them. So I think if we can resolve this now, either an alley or a street, it would be in best interest of the city and the residents.
Thank you very
That's all I
much.
have to say.
Anyone else in the community?
I don't know. We need to deliberate on this, and then we can make recommendations.
My name is Roger Ramsey. I live at 1240 Willow Springs Drive. I've heard folks dancing around two names that need to be brought out. This was all wrong to begin with. The developer, Lyndon Gallimore, bailed out 3 years ago and sold the property to Orth Construction. Now, Mr. Orth, to talk to him, we get someone says, talk to my lawyer. Stonewalled. Carol Spagnola spent 2 years trying to get this resolved, coming down here numerous times. It still, as you can see, has not been resolved. There's one contract on one of the unfinished houses, and those houses will be finished in another 2 months, and they'll be paying taxes on something they're not going to get. And if we continue the HOA, as Mr. Bruce said, we're not a big HOA. I don't know where that idea came from. We cannot afford to pay $100,000 for sidewalks, not even close to that. So I appreciate it if you make a note of that. And Mr. Gallimore, the developer, is gone. He has no say-so. He sold Mr. Orth a good deal, and Mr. Orth took advantage of it.
I appreciate you coming and talking, and I want to be clear, I think we all hear your conundrum, and everybody understands with your situation. What we have to do is, number one, deliberate on this street or not, and then, hopefully, provide direction and elucidate your options. I mean, that's really what we're here to do, and hopefully to do that to the best of our ability, fairly, and with common sense. So, thank you very much.
We appreciate that. Keep in mind, we're taxpayers too, and, we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You've heard our concerns, and we'd appreciate your deliberation and using some common sense and helping us all get out of this mess that someone else created for you and for us. And unfortunately, the city winds up being the ones that are going to have an issue eventually, just because it was put back on everybody else.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there
Thank you.
anybody else here that'd like to speak for or against this dedication of Poinciana Place?
Can I just say something about the 911?
If you'd like to approach the podium, please, so we can have...
When that issue came up with 911,
Well, I'm sorry.
When the issue came up with 911, I had already been to the EMS building and had checked on their map. They did have Poinciana Place on their map in their building, because they have a big map on the wall. I think the problem is that Poinciana Place did not come up on GPS, and it does not come up on GPS on my car either. As far as the post office goes with mailing addresses, there was no post office recognition of Poinciana Place when they first built there. The 3 houses that were built there first, they could not get mail. It took 6 months for them to get mail for the U.S. Post Office to recognize Poinciana Place, which now they do. The post office does recognize Poinciana Place now, okay? So if they're going to lose their address, that's something that those 3 houses are going to have to deal with. But it was a long time for these people to get this done, to get a mailing address that they could get mail.
These 3 folks, are they here tonight?
I don't think so.
No.
And so
No.
the folks that are represented here, they're not living in the 4 homes on the bottom
Oh,
either.
those 4 homes they're still under construction.
Right. So
So it's basically the 3
this
that
is
are.
the homeowners association. Everyone here lives where in relation to exactly what's
You all
happening
have to
here?
go through this?
You go out Poinciana, and then there's a whole development up there. And our whole development is city streets. That's the only part that's not a city street. And your sewer covers are on Poinciana. There are 2 or 3 city caps on that pavement. So if a plow has to come by, which we have to pay for a plow, and they do damage, because your sewer caps, one of them is going to need to be lifted, because the plow is going to hit it one of these days, I'm sure. But my point is, when that 911 issue came up, that the 911 could not find them, it was probably just because it didn't come up on the GPS. But I know that in their building, in their office, on their map, Poinciana is there, because I had been there already.
Thank you
And I
very
checked
much.
that. Okay.
Ms. Magnolia, in your mind, and I'm not saying this is Santa Claus, but what makes this right for you? What do you want to see happen?
I'd like to see it designated as an alley. We can't afford a road. We can't afford to make it a road.
But you want it to function like a street.
Yes.
Okay,
Well-
so that's not an alley.
Well, we're not so much, not even so much as a street, you know, the
Are you
traffic.
asking us to
it
take
has
over
be-
control of this, that?
Yes.
road?
Yes.
Okay.
And we do the maintenance and all that stuff? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I think they're, you know, but the three
And I
people
don't
who live
understand-
on this street aren't here or represented tonight.
No, one is
Why-
sick, one works at the hospital 12 hours a day, and the other man is 80-some-odd years old.
And
Did any of them call or send any
One-
email or anything to the staff to?
No, I know one did call when she called some while ago and complained about her taxes. Like, why is she paying taxes to live here when it's not even a street? And she doesn't get city amenities. She's paying city taxes and not getting city amenities. I know she did call about
I
that.
mean, I understand the homeowners association, and we can deliberate this once we close
Well,
our
because
public
we would
hearing.
all
I
have
think
to
that would
pay
be
for
better.
it.
But there is a very cheap way to fix this.
I like that.
And-
That's it? What is it?
But it's just not what you want. And that is that
Tell us.
we call it an alley. The city assumes it, we'll go fix the pavement. The city has no problem with that. The problem is, you just have to move your addresses to the streets off to the side. And 911, they don't like it, but they can probably live with it, and they will have it on their map, and it'll be on everybody's GPS, that they'll be able to find it. And they would just show up at that side of the house and deal with it. And then you don't spend $100,000, the city takes over it, and it's the best of a bad situation. But it doesn't function like a driveway in the back, and the city doesn't compromise what they're doing for street standards, even though we're willing to make exceptions. This body has already made that clear.
Okay.
We said we would make exceptions. So, I mean,
That would be great.
that, you know, we just need to know, we can deliberate today on what's in front of us. And then.
You know, had we been
I think
aware of
it'd
this,
be-
we could have fought with the builder. But we weren't aware of it. We
Well, I
saw
get
the
where you're
city,
coming
we saw
from.
the
It's even people
sewer
moving to
caps, we
houses.
saw the street sign, the street light, we saw the sign, of course, we assumed
Looks
it
like a
was a
road,
street.
you think it's a road. You don't
Yeah,
know.
we thought it
I
was
get it. But we're just kind of stuck with this too, because we're all here because we want to help you.
Okay.
And we want to do the right thing.
Please do.
But on the other hand, we can't say, well, the city's going to spend $100,000 to go fix this. That wasn't the
yeah.
taxpayers' issue to
We're not-
begin
we're not
with.
asking
Or-
you to do that.
And on the same token, we can't take all standards and just flush them and turn streets into alleys or turn a lane into semantics. Well, it's going to function like a lane, but we're going to let it act like a street. I mean, that's not intellectually honest with what we're trying to do. So I appreciate you all being here, and I just want to explain that. This is sort of unusual for us to get into this much dialogue, but I think it's because we care.
Okay.
So, thank you very much.
Okay.
Does anybody else wish to speak for or against?
We've talked about this in detail, and everybody in the association, it's basically, everybody's agreed that alley was the way to go, and that's because the city wouldn't be willing to put in a street, we already realize that. And it will be inconvenient for those three people, but they've already done that before, and they want what we want too, because they're gonna have problems no matter what. And you're right, the alley, we all agree with that, and I just want to state that's what we want, and we would appreciate if you do that for us. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak for or against at this point? I want to make sure everybody had a chance. Great, we'll go ahead and close the public discussion and open up discussion on the board, and we can call up staff. One of the things I would say is I think we should adjudicate on what we're dealing with today. We've been asked to dedicate this street or not today. When it comes to designating this as an alley or not, that's not the question on our agenda, so I would remind us of that. Secondly, having gone through street renaming issues with this body before, I think one of the principles that we try to employ in our street renaming policies and the ways that we look at things is we want the people who actually physically live on a street to decide what they want their street to be called or what they want to do with their street. So I would like to see that kind of a request come from the people on the street. Please give my street an alley name and remove my address. Make me have to get rid of my addresses and do all the things I have to do. Fine, that's great. That would be the chairman's pleasure or preference on that as to how to move forward and find a solution. But that makes sure that the people that live there are respected and that we deal with that. But those are my thoughts that, unfortunately, as I just said, I think that we would like to see an easy solution. It's a very unfortunate situation, but we have options. We can turn it into an alley completely and I think that would be the way to go. Or if we accept this as a street, it has to be contingent upon being brought to these design standards. We can do that tonight. We'll accept it as a street upon completion of a sidewalk and some exceptions that we could talk with Alan about, But I think that that's not what people are asking for. That doesn't sound, that sounds cost prohibitive. So I'll open it up for discussion. That's my framing of the discussion.
I have another question for staff. Hassan, in our definition of the alley, I know an alley is supposed to be to service the rear of the property. Since obviously the fronts of these houses are what face this private driveway, can it be named an alley? I mean, is it just semantics to say that this is the front of your house versus this is the rear of your house? Or is there any concern that if an alley is defined as a roadway that services the rear of a property, and this does not service the rear of the property, can this even be an alley?
I think there are two ways to look at it in this particular case. There is no regulation, and we cannot force a property owner to say when you build your house must face a particular direction. You can turn your house to face, to back the street. You can turn your house to face the side lot line. You can turn your house any direction. It's a private property right at that time. But there is a minimum measurement from the street that we would say this is the front yard setback. It's a front yard setback. But how you orient your house on that lot, it's really up to you to decide.
So if those are if we accepted this as an alley, would those three homes that are on the private driveway now meet the front yard setback off of Willow Springs?
If you accept it as an alley, yes, they would meet the front yard setback on Willow Springs. And that is how they were considered for approval, was that they met the front yard setback on Willow Spring. They have a public right-of-way on Willow Spring. That is where your front yard setback is. Ponciana Place considered the rear yard. And in this particular district, rear yard, they didn't need to go that as far as the front yard setback. But how they orient their house on the property was really left up to them. This being a private drive, they could access the property from that private drive. So that was the perspective from which staff approved this. Yeah. And just to mention something, staff understands the dilemma that the property owners are facing. Part of this has to do with full disclosure from the developer who is selling the properties, who is selling this lot out to the property owners, to disclose that what I am selling to you is a private drive and not a public street.
And that is not a city fault. That is not a city issue.
We have a situation right now where Of Construction, as they have mentioned, is constructing these 4 units. And there is a concern that the trucks going down on this road are affecting the state of Ponciana Place, and whose responsibility will it be to maintain Ponciana Place following this wear and tear, from this truck accessing Ponciana Place. Those are issues that are handled in the master deed, in the private covenants. We cannot enforce those private covenants. They are not within our regulations, issues within our regulations to enforce. The issue about 911, I should say, it's not just about addressing. It's not just about addressing. You can take, I don't know whether the owner of Unit 64, for example, will be happy for you to take away the address, take away my name, put it up on Trillium Tray. But there is a bigger concern from 911. Let's say this is, the address of this unit is 02 Trillium Tray, and this is 04 Trillium Tray, just assuming. all of those 7 units now have to also be named Trillium Trail. Their box, the mailbox, will be out on Trillium Trail.
Central mailbox. For everybody.
Central mailbox.
Okay, you have a central mailbox for everybody. Okay, cool. You have a central mailbox for everybody, wherever that is. And you have an incident, somebody is sick in this unit, and you call. This is the greatest concern from 911. And we get a call. Where are you? I'm out on Trillium Tray, 41B Trillium Tray. When the emergency service comes in, they hit Trillium Tray. Tendency in the mind is, this is Trillium Tray, keep going, looking for it. They don't have in their mind that you're looking for some house that is hidden somewhere on a road that is unnamed. That was really 911's biggest concern. That look, if we have another road that branches off Trillium Tray, that road should have a name. Give it a private drive. If it's a private drive, call it Ponciana Place. It's a private drive. Give it a name to provide easy access, easy identification of the houses that are there. Alan mentioned something, and I think it's important. At the time,
what about the caveat where you say, well, I understand I'm identifying the house off the front road, and you just accept that you just access it through the alley in the back. I mean, that's what people do with back alley accesses that don't have driveways in the front. I mean, that does happen.
Yes.
I mean, how's that different, and why is that a 911 issue?
You can have that situation. There will have to be a way of making those identifications. I think take Park Place apartment, Park Place subdivision.
So they can
Park
make their
Place.
own sign.
Yeah, if you go on,
You could have signage there.
If you go on
my
Park-
address, you access it through the alley in the back.
if you go on Park Place subdivision, you've got alleys at the back, you've got a public right-of-way in the front, just as what you have here, Willow Springs, and then you have an alley in the back. The alley, the addresses of the houses are off of Willow Springs. So when they go out to service any of those houses, they stop here, this is the house and I'm attending to, stop here, this is the house and I'm attending to, stop here, this is the house and I am attending to. The alley remains simply a private drive, private access for the property owner. So, and I think the mayor, when I met on site with the mayor, this was one of the concerns that he also brought up on site when we met there on that day.
But it does work that way if they wanted to do that.
I mean, they can make their own sign.
And then the city would have the street and repave that alley until the cows come home, and they're good.
And from another perspective, it's important to mention this. We're dealing with this as an alley. There are many subdivisions out there, some condos, that have drive aisles between them that are essentially private. And the Planning Commission will need to ask itself whether you're setting a precedence in terms of how you accept these things that were designed to serve as private ways and are now being brought before you for acceptance as public streets. Are there certain particular conditions under which you will make exceptions? And what precisely are those conditions?
Well, I think that's why we're here.
We have, and we shall have many of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, but there's a difference between accepting as a public street and a public alleyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
There's a
Yeah.
difference.
But isn't his point that once we accept it as a public alleyway, then we could see a multitude of other requests for private driveways to suddenly be requested, the city accept as public alleys, and now the
Well, I
city
think-
will have to take over the maintenance of all of these private driveways.
And I like what you're saying, I think the existential issue here is, how does it function? And the truth is, it functions like a street.
It needs to function like a
It-
street.
And it needs to function like a street. It's safer to function like a street. It just doesn't meet any of the requirements of a street.
Or the cost prohibitive.
And that's an unfortunate consequence, but it is what it is.
I have another.
two questions. Go ahead. You finish
Well, I
up
have
your
one other
questions.
question. I don't know that Hassan can answer it. I don't think the city attorney is still here.
Oh, good, I have that
But
question too.
it seems to me that this issue has arisen through non-disclosure by the builder who sold these homes to these homeowners. Why are we intervening as a commission instead of those homeowners taking legal action and pursuing it that way against the builder or the developer of the subdivision?
I don't know if it's the place of this body to advocate for or against any legal action or become involved in that. It's simply not a part of what we're here to adjudicate or what we're here to do. I mean, that's not what we're here to do.
They would probably.
We're here with the planning commission. We name and accept streets.
They
And
would
that's what we
probably
need to do tonight.
They would probably need the information of what decision we make to go
In order to do
forward.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise,
And so-
they'd be sent back here
But we need to
first.
make a decision on that. So I'm sorry, I appreciate you, but the public comment is over. Otherwise, this goes on all night long.
I have a serious issue in a situation that's been confounded with misconception, miscommunication, that we would make a decision whenever we have nobody here that lives on the road. We haven't had any thought process that's come from them there, and that's a big issue for me whenever the center of this, the nucleus, is there's
Missing.
been no communication.
So, I mean, I'll call for more discussion or
And I would
questions of
ask,
staff.
I mean, you have a background, is Jimbo here?
I can guarantee you that the city would be named in that suit.
Okay,
There
I
would be
was
some
just-
additional legal issues as somebody that's represented the city on the
I think we have
insurance
to-
side before.
All right, because that was my question.
Yes.
What liability would the city have in
No.
making this decision?
And this is part of due diligence whenever you pick up property, though.
I was gonna
When you
say,
buy a
now
house,
there
that's
are-
part of due diligence, is looking through your deed
But
and your
if we
restrictions
change
and your
someone's
covenants and
address-
understand what you're
Well,
sitting on.
Well, that-
Oh, I
there
don't,
are-
yeah, change.
And wouldn't
There-
title insurance
Yeah.
cover you in this case?
It depends. There are due process issues with changing the address of residents whenever they have not voiced any
Right.
thought.
And that's part of our
Yeah.
naming policy,
But there
is
are
not to do that.
substantial defenses for the city if there were to be an ultimate suits filed, but Jimbo could address that.
And I have one last question, and I think I have enough information. And Alan, you can help with this one if you want. Seeing that this concept plan, was there any changes to the concept plan once taken over by the second developer?
No, it stayed
So
the same.
everything's grandfathered in based on the original concept plan?
That's correct.
From 2003 or 2001?
I think by the time this was platted, it was around 2004, but it started a couple of years before.
So
Yes.
with that being said, once you start making improvements after so many years, and these houses are now being built on the lower end, and the developer's using the private drive as a street?
Well, he's using it as it was designed. It's for access to those four.
Now, did he build any of the other three homes?
I think he did.
So he changed the concept plan?
See, this was still vacant just a few years ago, and
Exactly.
when Mr. Gallimore stopped, this was not built. The pavement was there. The pads, the little squares that they actually own were there, platted, shown on the plat. The space in between all that's common land.
Right,
The pavement is on common land. Everybody there owns that space.
I got you, thank you.
Yeah.
But they could reframe the HOA, kick these houses out of the HOA and keep going with the HOA.
This is not response to that, but it is a thought that I feel like I need to put out. We would probably have less trouble in the future if we were to accept a street with things missing. If we gave deviations to no curb, maybe one sidewalk is required. If we were to let go of some standards, we would probably have less trouble with future developers trying to get to build a similar street, because we just wouldn't approve it.
Would
We will
staff,
have a lot of trouble with an alley, because we've got a lot of narrow gravel. Alley can be gravel. We've got a lot of narrow gravel private drives. We've got a lot of narrow paved drives that are private that could meet the alley standards if they will just plat the right-of-way and turn it over to us. So we would have a lot of trouble if it went with an alley
Right.
designation. But we have less trouble, although there will be trouble. There will be developers show up here and say, you let them have a street without a curb, you let them have a street without a sidewalk. we'll have to face that, but that will be less frequent than this alley situation.
And I think that's one of the things that this body had tried to redirect back to staff was, hey, look, we're willing, the body wants to make concessions, and we asked staff to discuss those concessions with the HOA to how can we develop some sort of concessions that would allow it to be palatable and that would work. I mean, and I think that those kind of discussions can continue with staff and to something that y'all could recommend to us. But those were the recommendations that we had last time, was a single sidewalk and curbs. And also limiting the width. We didn't think about it. So.
What initiated this in the first place? Do we know what initiated the application? Is it because the road was becoming in disrepair?
Yes, ma'am.
Because the builders build houses. There was no houses.
But what was the primary issue that arose to initiate the application?
Some of the people that were here with some of the first meetings with what we assume were the executive board people who could represent the association, don't work with us anymore. I was in on a couple of the early meetings, and it was before anybody had built the homes, actually. Maybe the first 3 were underway. But they were concerned about future cost of maintaining that street. And it was before a lot of stress of construction traffic on the street. And they were concerned about that being a liability. Also, the fact that homes were starting to go in there, and we don't plow the street when it snows. And we don't do some things that help you get in and out. So those were things we talked about. And at one meeting with the group, why don't we consider it an alley was thrown out. And that's where this idea of an alley came from, was a way to kind of, without thinking about all the things that would cause that to be derailed, it was thrown out as a way, maybe we could take it as it is because it kind of looks like a wide alley. And that would be simple, but then that was before everyone had really thought about all the issues you've heard about tonight.
Existentially
They're
functions
correct
like a
in that
street.
we did discuss alley during one of our meetings.
Okay, so but it functions like a street, it needs snow removal like a street. It would be nice to have logical 911 services, especially since the homes function and face that way. So, and having said that, we've had some discussion, I don't want to hurry anyone along, I want to make sure everyone feels listened to, but I am looking for resolutions or recommendations for,
I'll attempt a motion if you'd like.
okay.
Let me go back to how it's actually stated here then. I would move that we recommend that the city accept dedication of Poinciana Place as a public street contingent upon the street being brought up to city standards.
Would you like to enumerate any exceptions to those standards, like a single sidewalk or a curb only, and in the setbacks, as Mr. Cantrell talked
I
about? or
would
do you
put
want
with
to
the
include that?
exceptions of not requiring sidewalks on both sides, only requiring the one sidewalk rather than 2. I don't know that we want to make an exception for the curb because I think you're seeing the decay of that street right now because of the lack of a curb.
But still having the curb, so
So-
basically just having a single sidewalk
Having a single sidewalk.
at a
but other-
lane.
But otherwise meeting city standards as either a lane or a street.
That if at such time that it accepted those standards, then we would take it.
Yes.
That's your motion. So we have a
Yes.
motion, let me restate the motion to make sure I'm clear, to accept Poinciana Place as a public street upon completion of work that would make it acceptable to city standards, with the exception of having a single sidewalk rather than 2.
I just want to clarify what city standards are. So do they have to, Alan, do they have to add any more binder, asphalt?
Technically, the answer to that is no, the street is built, but when you put the curbs on the sides, you'll be cutting a little bit of that away to make room for the curb to fit in, and then you have to patch that back. So there will be some asphalt going that narrow space in front of the new curb.
What about the setbacks? Are we going to be okay with that if this street were to be constructed with the curb, or how are we going to be doing with the setbacks and the
I
BZA
think
and all that?
I think those homeowners are going to then have to apply for
An
exception.
Well, you
If the
can't.
city makes a change to a street and accepts a street,
I mean, we're-
does
we're
that
giving-
change?
we're granting the
Yeah,
exception.
exactly. There's actually an ordinance on the books that prevents us from making a change that messes up their zoning, right?
Yes,
That controls
They-
us.
There you go.
there would be in order in terms of zoning if this were a city-initiated action. So if the city went in and said, we need this for some reason.
Right,
We
that's
need
what
to
that
make
was
this,
for.
then at that point they will be accepted. But if it comes from the property owners, we will have that problem. So they will have to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals to deal with the setback issues, any setback issues.
And of course, by the same token, the three people who live here on this, who would be affected by a non-city initiated change to the street, we're not hearing from them tonight. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second for this motion? If we-
So can you just recap the exceptions one more time? Sidewalk, one sidewalk,
It's city standards with only the exception of only having one sidewalk.
and curb.
Yes, you need to meet the city standards
City
of a
standards,
lane or
period.
street.
City standards, period.
Okay.
I'm accepting one sidewalk.
Minus one
And
sidewalk.
Yes.
Was that the educated guess from Alan that going to cost 100,000?
I think
For a
his
street?
educated guess included 2 sidewalks and,
18 linear feet.
No, it was a single sidewalk.
oh, it was a
It was a
single
single
sidewalk?
sidewalk,
Yeah,
yes.
then it may be.
So, Alan, anything to say different to that? Make sure, okay.
Sidewalk costs about $6 a square foot, which is about, for a 5-foot sidewalk, it'd be $30 a linear foot. My estimate, I would hope, is high, so that if you get a contractor to give you a cost, it's somewhere below there and everybody's happy. I can't do that math this quickly, but
What year was
I
this?
don't think the street department, which maintains the streets, would run me out of town if I threw this out here. There is a curb that uses less concrete, therefore less cost, that would be okay for something like this. And we're actually using the curb when we take an old city street that's not curbed and we bring it near standard. We don't have to take old streets and bring them up to standard. But when we're working on them and we put curb on, we did it to 9th Avenue just recently up on Rome Street. So that may be another exception if you're looking for another way to reduce their cost.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. The motion is here for discussion or it will die. And then we can restate further motions or discussions.
I'd be willing to modify the motion to include the reduced cost curbing as suggested.
And my comment and for discussion with that would be, I think that it might be smart if we simply, as a body today, simply just, as it stands in accepting this today, it doesn't meet the standards and we deny it, and then we direct staff to work with them for cost-effective options to the point that this association and the people who live here decide, you know what, I like that. Then we come back and we look at it and see what we can do. That would be, I think, a cleaner way of dealing with it and helping everybody to work through it. That would allow for some flexibility of the staff without something quite so binding, because there may be some cost-creative ways in which you guys look at it and really decide what you like, which is the spirit of what we tried to do before. So, we haven't said your motion, not to shoot your motion down, but that's why I'm not seconding it, and I'm seeing if it's going to second or not, or if it's going to die on the floor.
It appears to be dead.
Okay, so you know, I'm looking for a further motion.
What was this, what year was this property annexed?
It would have to be in the early 2000s. The developer requested annexation. He took advantage of our water sewer materials agreement by doing that. And that agreement is there for an incentive for the developer to ask for annexation. So that's, it was at Mr. Gallimore's request, early 2000s.
Are there properties in the city that were annexed around that time that do not have sidewalks, period?
Any subdivisions built at the same time as his has sidewalks. There are a few exceptions where a subdivision had a street that fronted, came in along the edge of the subdivision. They didn't own the property next door. They weren't developing that property, and the planning commission allowed them to delete that sidewalk. They gave them an exception to only one sidewalk. Usually when that happens, I will ask for a wider sidewalk on the single side. On that one I'm thinking about, I got overruled.
Okay.
So there are several cases where we have approved a single sidewalk as a deviation, and the purpose
have.
was no one was getting advantage of it from the adjacent property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looking for motions here, or ones made from the chair.
I think you know the motion you want to make.
Well, I'm going to motion from the chair then. So then that is going to be that we deny the dedication of Ponciano Place today as a public street for the number of reasons that we've carefully tried to look at, but that we encourage staff to continue to engage them in ways in which they can present this street a way that would be acceptable to the city to take on. Because we understand where they're coming from, and it needs to function as a street. It's going to function more properly as a street. So I'm going to motion to deny.
Would you put a time limit on that?
No.
Because it seems we've moved it back for these folks a couple of times.
I mean,
At
I
least
would.
once.
I would just. I'm motioning to, as it stands. I mean, if you want to put an exception, I'm just motioning deny today, and let's come up, swing again. But if you have a better idea, that's fine. That's why I'm just a
I think your
motion, no
idea is
second.
pretty good. I just think we ought to put a time limit on it so this doesn't just keep dragging out.
Well,
What's
It would
can you-
end tonight with the
Yeah, that's-
deny.
that's-
The motion deny would kill it.
Yeah.
They would
So-
be done now. Now they have all the time in the world they want, or not. But that's in their court to decide, I can get comfortable with 30 grand, I can get comfortable with 80 grand, I can get comfortable with it like it is or not. But it's a private issue rather than a public issue at that point. It's not a public issue as to how the thing was built or how it was represented. That's not, and that, I mean, I get it, everybody, they want it to be our issue or our problem, but it wasn't. We didn't make the city. We allowed a public drive. There's a rationale why it's a private drive. I mean, and it was built as a private drive. It's functioning as a private drive. But that's not, there's a lot of private drives in the city. And a lot of people would like to not have to take care of their private drives at a certain point. But that's not the onus of the rest of the taxpayers when we decide we don't like our private drives.
I'll second your motion.
So, a motion and a second for denial. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, maybe consternation, we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Okay. Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
No.
Commissioner Wild?
yes.
And Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
And Chairman Zions.
Yes.
Motion to denial is approved.
And I think from the chair, I want you to hear this. This isn't a harsh denial. People spent a lot of time here tonight. You didn't hear this body, none of us here, say, we really don't care about your situation. It's trying to get it right and do the right thing for the city and you. So please hear that. Please talk with ASONG. Please talk with Alan. Charlie is acting director of our vision right now. If you've heard a list of things that we can do that bring this to function as a street. I think it would serve you better as a street. You get 911 address, you get your address there, your house is faced that way, you get snow removal. It doesn't function as a nameless alley. That sounds like it's better. It just there needs to be a cost-effective way to work it for you.
And those
they'll
people
try
in
to give
those
you your best
homes are
option.
that's the people in those three homes are the trump
Yes.
card.
Yeah,
They
they need to come by and
I
say,
mean,
this is
if-
what we want.
But we all have to pay for it. Your trash trucks are coming down that road, they've been all down since forever, since the house was built.
And you need to talk to him too. You need to talk to the developer and those homeowners.
Yep.
Anybody else can come in and say, we want a street or something. Not everybody has a problem that was, the city is at fault here. We can look at that picture, the diagram. They allowed them to turn the houses around, put their driveways into that street. that
Okay, well,
private driveway. There's 7 houses there.
I think
that they let the
what we're trying to say is, as a conciliatory statement of what the city can do, I think the state, and I don't want to get into a discussion that the city was at fault there. I think clearly from our professional, our opinions of our staff that know that not, you can orient your house any way that you'd like, and the developer can. And this is something that people do when they buy their homes. But we don't need to discuss that right now. You need to hear that this group wants to help in the way that we can, and without assuming something that's not ours. And that's what we did tonight. So please continue to work with us, know that we care. Nobody likes to say no, everybody wants to help. But we tried to do that right thing, and please chat with staff to move forward. So thank you all very much for coming and helping us look at that with you tonight, and appreciate your time and energy.
See, they ended up being in the drink. But this is what can happen to you.
Okay, let's go to the next item on the agenda. Does anybody need to take a break? Is everybody ready to move
That's not a
forward?
bad idea.
I was
Does
thinking
anybody
of taking.
want to take a break?
Let's, Nico?
We have let's take a break before we go into number 3.
Yes, sir.
Is there a bathroom at the back end?
Start up again here in
No,
5
it's right
minutes.
out here in the lobby.
Be number 2?
Well, yeah, the de-annexation
Can I
thing.
borrow your phone? I just
Aren't we
wanted
on
to follow
Cora
my
Lane
life.
next?
No,
Oh, Cora Lane's the one that got dropped. I thought,
which is going to be finer minor subdivision plat approval on Cora Lane.
Say that 5 times.
I'm telling you. Finer minor, it's final. I've talked enough tonight.
What is that?
I'm a hick.
Nothing could be
Get off my
finer
banjo.
than
I'll say
that.
Okay.
All right.
Please, a song, if you will present for us the Cora Lane issue.
The staff on this is, Mr. Chairman, I ask for just 30 seconds, let Manley get here so he can present this. Just 30 seconds.
Who are we waiting on?
Matt Manley,
We told him we
Manley?
take a break.
Okay.
he went out.
Haha, sorry. Okay, just kidding. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. And, I mean, I'd like to move a meeting along efficiently, but that was important to everybody to hear it and understand that what we care, but
Man, that just, I mean,
There are
So you
serious due
don't want-
process issues with moving forward as requested. There are legal ramifications that could come back that I don't think the city would be very happy with.
that's,
It did, and it got shot down. Okay, on to new
Talk to
business.
them about having people on that street decide that they want it.
There needs to be some voice from the people that you're actually affecting.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, my God.
Plus,
I tried to tell, they got mad at me. I said, those are your trumps.
plus the major interest in that HOA is still the developer until he
I'm back.
shows up and says, "Come on."
All right, Mr. Manley, please proceed with the next item on our agenda, which is the first item of our new
Yes,
agenda.
it's a new business. Good evening. This request for a final plat approval for a minor subdivision comes to us from petitioner Brian Hunt. We also had Todd Wood here with the engineering for this site. This is a 2.677 acre parcel that the applicant is proposing to subdivide and create 2 small parcels that front Cora Lane. The property is zoned RP3, which allows 8.5 units per acre, and is proposing to develop duplexes on the 2 small lots. The other item I want to point out on this is the transportation easement, which is running in the middle between the 2 lots, a portion of which is on both parcels, and would be used as a common driveway entrance. This would leave 2.176 acres remaining that the applicant intends to develop down the road for multifamily, but we don't have that development or any concept for that at this time. Any questions?
Just one ingress, egress.
Yeah,
You do not-
is that what you have planned, is just one, yeah.
So
As you-
this
as you
common
continue-
driveway entrance is going to be the entrance to the rest of the development?
No, there,
Or am I
at the
just
bottom,
on-
it says future entrance to
Oh,
possible.
okay.
Oh, I couldn't see that.
I didn't see it either, and I was getting real scared.
This won't be a
I was gonna say, Tom, this is not a good day.
We don't
30
want
feet
it.
wide. All right, what was your options and recommendation again? What was staff's recommendation, please?
Staff recommends approval.
Thank you.
Make a motion to approve.
All right, do we have,
You're not even going to let him talk, are you?
that's right. You just said he wants to approve. Now, is there anybody here wishing to speak for or against this plat approval? Okay, well, then we will close public comment at this moment then, and we'll open it up for discussion and questions for staff. Does anybody have questions for staff regarding this plat approval? Not seeing any, I'm looking for motions then.
Make a motion for approval.
Motion for approval. That was second, all right. Any discussion? No. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
And Chairman Zion?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you very much. All right, the next item on the agenda was removed earlier. We will now move to the consideration of a for de-annexation, a property in Gray. Mr. Bernard.
Chairman, the request before you is to consider the de-annexation of lot number 3 of the replat of a portion of the Elmal and Rose Harrison Harris property in Gray. This is a request that the property owner has contacted the city and asked that it be removed from the city limits. So this is basically a contraction of the city limits. The property is currently zone R2. It's inside the city limit. It's a vacant piece of property. Back when the city did an area annexation in Gray, there was a consideration to de-annex about 150 properties at a time. The standard that was used was to de-annex lots that had residential houses on them while maintaining inside the city limits lots that had commercial development or were vacant. The rationale behind maintaining vacant lots in the city was that a new buyer could in future buy this particular piece of property, develop it, and want to remain inside the city. It should be mentioned that this property owner was informed, received notices. I've gone through the file and I've seen the notices that were sent out at the time indicating which lot was being de-annexed, and the maps were attached thereto. Staff has reviewed this based on sound planning principles and considering some of the evaluation points that the Planning Commission had worked on in the past as elements that could be considered in de-annexing a piece of property. The first being the implementation of the plan of services. If we've not implemented a plan of services for an annexation, it could be a legal ground for the property owner, to go to court and request de-annexation. The city would then have to either provide services or consider de-annexing that particular piece of property from the city. With the de-annexation of the Gray area that was done at the time, Gray Station Road was de-annexed. The lights, street lights on that particular road were removed, which means the plan of services that was adopted for the annexation of this area is no longer fully applicable, as it were at the time of annexation. Benefit of materials agreement is an important point. Developers, when they develop within the city, they benefit this materials agreement, which basically involves the city reimbursing a developer for the cost of material water and sewer facilities, minus taxes paid for those material. This piece of property is currently vacant and it has not benefited from any materials agreement. The material agreement works on a rationale that over time, property taxes, sales taxes will feed back into the cost that the city incurs in feeding the bills for the material. Adjacent to Johnson City public right-of-way, the city spends money maintaining public right-of-ways, providing access to particular pieces of properties, and the property owner pays property taxes as a kind of a contribution to the maintenance of the road that is providing access to the property owner's house. In this case, Gray Station Road has been de-annexed, is no longer in the city. So this piece of property is not adjacent to a Johnson City public right-of-way. Gray Station Road is a county road. In 2004, when the planning boundary map was initially set, it established an area which was considered to, although being at the time outside of the city limits, the growth and development of that particular area influenced development inside the city, whether in terms of land use, transportation, economic development. In 2004, when this was established, this growth area, this planning boundary was established, this piece of property was outside of the initial planning boundary. As such, it was not conceived as a property that can have significant impact within properties or on development within the city limits at the time. I sent notices to different departments, transportation, transit, schools, public works, water and sewer, different city departments for review and recommendation. I didn't get any department being against the request. The only fiscal benefit, monetary benefit that the city gets from this property at this time is basically property tax, which is about $343. This will be the recurring loss that the city will suffer if this property is de-annexed. This de-annexation will not create a do-not-hold situation inside the city limits, which is usually a situation we want to avoid. When the de-annexation policy came up at the time it did, there was a lot going on at the state level, and the city commission was concerned about the implementation of the adoption and implementation of that policy and how it could affect the political climate at the time. For that reason, the de-annexation policy was not adopted. As we have these de-annexation requests coming before the Planning Commission, it may be time to reconsider that policy, to place it before the City Commission again, and have the City Commission adopt, and as such provide some very specific guidelines that the Planning Commission and the City Commission itself can follow in determining whether a piece of property should be de-annexed from the city or not. So staff will make basically two recommendations: that you consider, re-examining this policy and placing it before the City Commission again for adoption before we proceed with this request, or recommend this to the City Commission for approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernard. Do we have any questions for staff? This from the chair. My thought would be at this point that we look at this action. And carefully consider it. Probably my recommendation would be that we ask for guidance from the City Commission, that we defer this for 90 days, have them come back, evaluate the guidelines policy, and then have a discussion or a hearing as to how we're going to move with this based on the guidance from the City Commission themselves. We had put the guideline policy together. It never was voted up, yay or nay. It sort of went away, and it would be nice to have their speaking into what they want us to do and how we want to guide it, because we want to be very careful how we handle de-annexations moving forward and have a well thought out process. And I think it's also significantly unusual to have specific lots or parcels, particularly on the periphery of the city, considered for de-annexation. It's not something that comes up regularly in the state or the state legislature. That's not, that's not something that would be considered usual and customary, and I think that we should be very careful before we begin to make examples of single requests for property owners for de-annexation. This does not have a broad land use plan impact for us right now, and I don't think that there's an emergency to get this done. And I think it's also somewhat very concerning to me that the reason for request is to eliminate property taxes paid, because there's probably 10 or 20, 30,000 other people who would like to do that as well. So my recommendation is that we defer. We ask for city commission guidance and adoption of a guidelines policy so that we can begin to look at this a little more carefully. If there is anybody who wishes to make a motion for that, we can do that.
You want a motion for that?
I do.
I got it.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Anybody with further discussion? No. All right, thank you very much. If you'll call the roll.
Okay. Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Chairman Zions?
Yes. All right.
Motion to defer was approved.
Thank you. So please come back to us within, and ask the city commission to give us some direction on that, come back with the guidelines, if they adopt them or don't, or how they change them, or what they can let us know within 90 days so that we can better understand this case and how they'd like us to proceed.
Tim, do we want to ask them for a policy on that? Why wouldn't we
On this
say
particular,
that? Just give us a policy instead of asking for guidance. I don't know, I'm
the policy
asking
on
you.
this specific one or the policy period?
A policy period.
Well, that's kind of what I mean with the guidelines. It's
Okay.
actually it's a drafted policy.
Okay.
It just needs to be approved, and it needs to be looked at, and if they need to tweak it, fine. But then we would have something to look at. So, sound
This
good?
is how I split time.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is renewal of bond for Cedar Creek Phase 4 subdivision.
In June last year, the Planning Commission approved this final subdivision plat, conditioned, and it was conditioned on the developer posting a $126,000 bond for completion of the improvements that were outstanding at the time. The property owner posted a bond, had the final plat approved and recorded. The improvements, the subdivision regulations require that 1 year after the bond is posted, it should be brought back before the Planning Commission for two reasons: renew the bond and also provide update on any work that has been completed on the side, any issues that may be going on with the subdivision that the Planning Commission may want to re-examine. So construction is going on in this particular subdivision. There is no big issue. Some of the sidewalks, the developer is basically constructing the sidewalk as the houses are built. So that reduces the cost we have for the sidewalk as posted on the bond. So the bond associated costs with respect to stormwater management that had been taken care of. So the engineering division went out, support, re-inspected the site and determined that the bond could be reduced from $126,000 to $81,000. So that would be the bond amount reduction. There is an issue happening on this particular subdivision. I think it's important to bring to the attention of the Planning Commission. When the subdivision plan was approved, the name of the street, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to street names. The name of the street intersecting Hamed Court, this is the name of the street as approved on the subdivision plat, Sentinel Road and Sentinel Court. This is what was approved on the subdivision plat. Go back there. So this is the subdivision plat as approved, signed by the Secretary of the Planning Commission for recording Sentinel Road, Sentinel Court. This is what was approved and recorded. However, both in the GIS system of the city and in 911 and
They're not
tax
gonna like it.
assessor and tax assessor's office, the name being used for this particular street is Dartmoor Road.
Is what?
Dartmoor. Dartmoor.
Oh, Dartmouth.
That's
Dartmoor.
dark.
Dartmoor. Dartmoor. Thank you for that.
I thought you were abusing that name.
She just shoot darts. So, houses are being built on this road. Dartmoor. Houses are being built on this road. At least I could pronounce Pontiana, so I beat Alan on that one. Houses are being built on this road. Currently, permits have been issued. This showed how many permits have been issued on this side. There's a CO already issued for one of that. 1, 2, 3. 3 houses have been issued CO, and the addresses they're using, it's all Dartmoor. The reason Dartmoor came up is before this developer submitted the plat for approval, he had spent months working with GIS and 911 on what name would be acceptable for this road. They went back and forth and they finally agreed on Dartmoor. Then he submitted the plat with Sentinel. That slid through and got approved. 911 is concerned about changing the name of the street in their system from Dartmoor to Sentinel. The reason being that there are usually they try to avoid streets that sound very close to the names of other streets already in the city.
They hate Sentinel Road, Sentinel Court. That's just
Yeah.
going to send chills up their spine.
So if somebody is really facing some significant issue and they say, where are you? And you say, I'm a Sentinel. You don't know if they're talking about Sentinel out there or the one at ETSU, just based on that variance in spelling. So they do everything possible to avoid this situation for public safety reasons. So Public Works Department has not yet put up the street name. If you look at this road, this is the intersection of Hammett Road and Condor. It currently has, the two street names at that intersection. If you look at this one at the intersection of Hammett and Dartmoor or Sentinel, it only has the sign for Hammett. It doesn't have a sign for Sentinel or Dartmoor, because strictly they go with what is approved on the plat. If Public Works were to go out there and put up a sign today, they will have to follow what is official, what is approved on the plat.
Which is Sentinel Road and Sentinel Court.
Yes, that's what is approved. They will have to go with that. So there is this discrepancy between what 911 wants and has and what was officially approved.
But then they would have to change all the plats.
They will have to, there are two possible ways this can be handled.
Okay.
The developer can simply change the plat, get it named Dartmoor, bring it back before the Planning Commission, and it's approved as Dartmoor on the subdivision plat. So that's a street naming on the subdivision plat. Or we will have to go through a street renaming process using a resolution at the city level, city commission level. There is an ordinance, there is a moratorium on that. So we cannot use that procedure. In this process of reducing this bond, I've reached out to the developer to say, can you, change this, and that has not been
I got a
done.
question for you.
Yes, sir.
For 35 years, I've talked over radios and had to deal with situations like that. It's really simple. I'm sorry if 911 is bothered by it, but when you say Sentinel, you spell it out, Sierra, Echo, November, Tango, India, November, Echo, Lima. And when you say I can't even say it, Centenary, you spell that out, Charlie, Echo, November, Tango. To bring this up and say this is a problem for 911 is a little bit ridiculous, in my opinion. That is an easy fix. And if they don't know how to do it, tell them to look up the phonetic alphabet and learn how to use it.
Second.
Third, because this is a
That's
small.
ridiculous.
And it's not like we're a town of 50
And that's not aimed
streets.
at you, but I'm sorry, this is wasting our time.
In 911, this is kind of getting in the weeds. So it is named Sentinel Court and Sentinel Road on the plat, right?
That
And
is
we
the
can approve it
official
like
name
that.
of
And
the
the only
plat.
person who has a fly in this ointment is a 911 operator who didn't want it to say Sentinel. But at least they don't have to say Dartmoor, right?
Makes your job easier.
All right. Do we understand this?
Wait,
Is this-
are there any houses on Sentinel Dartmoor Road at the current time?
Yes, ma'am.
What
And they're gonna have
mailing
Dartmoor
address
addresses.
are they using?
They are using that, if you look at this has been issued a CO, a certificate of occupancy.
So this
which
is
means-
different from a 911 issue. You're saying there's homes and people living on Dartmoor.
And they're getting
but
their
there's a
mail
plat
to
that we got
Dartmoor.
today for Sentinel.
Correct.
Yes.
And there's nobody
Yes.
living there under Sentinel right now.
There's nobody living there on the
then we
center.
just
Then we
need to
approve
change
it
the
under
flag.
Dartmoor, and we tell them
Yeah.
to change the name to Dartmoor, and if they don't like that, then they can
Have the
figure out how they
developer
want to
change
change
the
it.
But there's a cost to that, right, to the developer?
But he's the one that built them under Dartmoor versus Sentinel. It's
Oh,
not
okay, fair
us.
enough.
Did you not say the developer can change the plat and make it?
The developer
Dartmoor?
can change the plan.
There's
And
one
I
guy
think
does for
He needs to
approval.
the
fix it.
planning commission can use the bond situation to kind of handle this, because the developer may have no incentive on why I should come back to Johnson City and, pay a surveyor to change the plat and resubmit it, whatever it's going to cost the surveyor. It's just a name on a plat, maybe $100, who knows? But I've reached out to developer, I haven't received a response from him yet.
Well,
We
he
have it
certainly
in-
can't put any more on Dartmoor until he does it.
We have an incorrect plat. It's functioning in that street as Dartmoor, but the plat says Sentinel, right? That's the cut to the chase.
Yes, sir.
We can't approve a plat unless it's correct.
The
right?
plat is already approved
But just
and
change the name
recorded.
after
But
the
he
plat.
can't get building permits.
The plat is
Yeah.
already approved as, with Sentinel, recorded 1 year ago.
Have all the building
Screwed
permits
up.
been
Okay.
issued for all of the lots on this street?
I bet they have.
Let me
Are
see.
there any empty?
One building permits have been issued for permit issued 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So he's not going to come back and ask for another building
Let me fix this real
permit.
quick, though. We're actually just being asked to renew the bond, to reduce the bond level based on the work that's been completed. And so that really doesn't have anything to do with this whole subdivision plat naming street thing. This is.
Brought it up as an issue.
It's an issue, but it's not what we're here to discuss or how to fix. I mean, that's not, right? Am I getting this right?
I think
And for us to hang over a bond over his head because there's an error on the plat, I'm not sure if that's what we're here to do either. I mean, unless there's somehow this bond is tied to the street names, and help me understand that angle.
there is a relation between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Which sometimes may not be very explicit.
Okay.
In posting the bond, he includes in that cost of the bond street signs. So he includes in that total cost of the bond, street sign is included in that amount. Public Works Department has to go out and put up that sign as part of the bond that the Planning Commission has accepted. And Public Works Department is in a fix. What name should I put out? Should I put out Sentinel, which the Planning Commission approved, or should I put out Dartmoor? And I think there are two, we have alternatives in our hands that we can use to fix this problem, which is, one, engage the developer, having fixed the plat, change it from Dartmoor, from Sentinel to Dartmoor.
Right.
As a subdivision plat, it will come back before the Planning Commission for approval. The plat will come back before the Planning Commission for approval. Or we will have to get a street renaming. The City Commission will have to uplift the moratorium and we do a street
But
renaming.
how does that relate to the bond reduction today?
The amount of the bond that we're reducing, let me get to that, please. Street and traffic signs is included in the amount we're reducing.
I mean, I'm talking several $100. We're not talking the tens of thousands of dollars of bond reduction. I mean, we're talking street. So you're saying, well, you didn't do the several $100s work, so I'm not going to reduce your bond? Kind
No,
of
no, no,
thing?
no. If the name of the street is just Dartmoor across, then he only has to pay for one sign. If he goes by what is on the subdivision plat, he has to pay for two signs. There are two signs involved.
What's the cost of the sign?
It says one is $350.
$350, that's what we're talking about.
$400.
Yeah, so that is how it is associated with this, with the bond. If you stick to what we have on the subdivision plat, there are two different names. Let me point this out very clearly. If you stick to what is on the subdivision plat, you've got Sentinel Road going up this way and Sentinel Court coming down this way. So you will have two different signs.
So you'd have to add another 350 to the bond amount.
But if you just go with Dartmoor, you just have to deal with one sign.
I'm feeling like we're sort of in the
let's
weeds
just-
on something that's
let's
really a big deal.
increase
This
the-
seems like a staff level thing that should be fixed instead of here. This
Well,
seems like,
you're
hey,
setting the bond amount, so add $1,500 back for a plat correction.
There you-
And raise the bond amount up by $1,500. That should cover paying for the plat correction. And let's move on.
and then he can fix it. Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for, Alan. Thank you.
And that's
That
good
this is a
incentive
very-
for him.
Praise be.
So now we want to reset the bond amount then, not at 81,000, we're going to set it at 82.5. Is that what you're recommending?
Yes.
Okay, so if we reset the bond at 82.5, that would be fair for what work that's been completed. It would represent, hey, you need to take care of this, and you guys can communicate about the street and have it fixed one way or the other. I think that's fair. So let's have, any further discussion on that? Let's have a motion on
I
the
have
floor.
one very petty piece of discussion.
Okay.
So say $100.
But it says there's a fee of $100 will be required for the extension of the bond. Does that need to be added to it too, or is that
That's
encompassed
just the
in that
fee.
1,500?
That's not the bond, that's just the fee.
Right, but it wasn't included in the original 81,000. So I'm asking if we need to increase it by another $100 to meet what is written here.
Fees are not included in the bond, is what I'm saying. That's just your fee you pay. Yeah.
And that's for
Okay,
the
so that's paid.
That's a fee.
Okay.
And he may never come bothering about this bond because what he posed all was a letter of credit, irrevocable letter of credit that kind of automatically renews itself.
Yep.
You know, so he may never come back bothering about whether we're asking him $100 to renew this
Yeah,
or
this
not.
is-
Okay.
He may never show up.
Very
It's
good.
gonna
Okay,
be an
so-
expensive-
Can I just add that on the plat, Dartmoor is one word, Dartmoor is actually two words. You don't want to
Gonna
come
be
back
two signs for
in
that.
a month's time.
Jack.
Change the sign again.
I'm going to make a motion that we approve the renewal of the bond for $82,500 and that we have justified the increase for them to come up with a solution to fix the name conflict on Sentinel Road and Sentinel Court. And that could be replatting it or signing it, however they want to fix it. And then you'll do that with staff. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandus?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Popovich?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Wow. Commissioner Williams? Yes. And Chairman Zions?
Yes. Do we have
Motion to
anybody-
adjourn.
That's right. Thank you. Second?
Second.
Approved. Boom.
So why did you vote again?